Well, it's always a good idea, if you're going to talk about a particular subject, to figure out what it is that you want to do. So what we're going to talk about today are what are the goals of a macroeconomic system. If we're going to judge systems and we're going to say this one's better than that one, or we're more successful in this area than that area, it's always good if we know what those areas are. And there are basically three macroeconomic goals that all societies try to accomplish, that all societies try to some way or other achieve. We have varying success with various different ones of these, but they are the goals that we set for our economy as well as all the rest of them throughout the world. The three goals are price level stability, full employment, and economic growth. And so what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about the various different ones of these. How do we measure them? How would we know when we actually met those goals? And what are we really shooting for? The first of these is price stability. The reason we're interested in price stability, it may strike you as odd. What difference does it make whether prices are stable or not? Where it really makes a big difference is when we start contracting through time. As you move through time, you make the assumption that prices remain the same. So as an example, if I agree to borrow $10,000 from you and repay it in 5 years, there's kind of this implicit assumption that in 5 years when I repay the $10,000 that I'll be able to buy a certain quantity of goods and services. The longer that time period is, the more important it is that those prices remain relatively stable. To the extent that they're not stable, then I introduce a certain amount of risk into that transaction. In other words, you're not quite sure exactly how much you're going to be able to buy with the $10,000. And so as a result, you're going to adjust the interest rate to try to compensate for that. Our experience, as has been the experience for most societies, is that we have inflation in our system. Inflation is a general increase in the price level. It's not necessarily an increase in a particular price, it's an increase in prices in general. Not a single price, but prices in general. Now we oftentimes see that some prices are going up, some prices are going down, but what we're talking about here is prices overall are going up. We might very well have a particular good or service that is going down in price, but in this case we're talking about overall. If we average them all out, overall they're going up. Our best measure for that, at least for the consumer level, is known as the Consumer Price Index. This is the most frequently quoted number, and it is a market basket of goods and services. It's actually produced by the government. The government actually sends people out, and their job is to go out and price a particular basket of goods and services. So the government decides the average family will need this amount of this particular good. They'll need so many loaves of bread. They'll need so many gallons of milk. They'll need so many pairs of shoes. They'll need so many shirts and so forth. And they actually go out and price those. They have people hired who go out systematically and look to see what the prices are happening. Now it's important to note that prices vary depending on what part of the country you're in, and so they do it throughout the country. Their numbers are gathered for New York, the numbers are gathered for San Francisco, the numbers are gathered for Atlanta, and so forth. It's also important to note that they're only gathered in urban areas. They're not gathered in rural areas, and so as a result, to a certain extent, it's not a completely accurate measure. What sorts of things might we include in it? Well, the market basket actually includes pretty much anything that you would buy. So it includes 42% of it is housing, and they try to capture not only the cost of housing in the sense of mortgage rates, price of houses, but they also try to capture rents and how those are changing. It includes 17% for transportation, 15% for food and beverages, 6% for medical care, 6% for education and communication. All of these numbers are supposed to be indicative of what they have established as the average budget amounts for the average American family. And I'll remind you that in economics we always talk about the family as the decision unit. In general, we don't talk about individuals making decisions, but generally the family as a whole makes these decisions. These numbers are collected and they're published. They're easily available on the web. And you can see the CPI numbers, the Consumer Price Index numbers for, this is base year. Looks like, what base year is this? Where's the 100? Looks like it's about 1982. And you can see the prices have gone up during that time. So the number 195.3 for 2005 means between 1982 and 2005, prices have gone up by 195.3%. And you can see how they've changed through time. You can see that prices have gone up through time and seems to be kind of a steady increase. Now again, these are readily available on the web. You can find them on the web, and in fact you can download them and even put them in an Excel spreadsheet. They're also widely used in various different contracts. As an example, Social Security is tied to these. The amount that you receive for Social Security is connected to these, and there are even some labor contracts that are as well. Now what this allows us to do is to compute the inflation rate. The most frequently quoted number in the newspaper is not what is the Consumer Price Index, but what is the inflation rate. And as an example question, if we look 1945 to 1946, how much did prices go up in that year? Well, we see that the CPI in 45 was 18, in 46 it was 19.5. So the inflation rate is the CPI for 1946 minus the CPI for 1945 divided by the CPI for 1945. We want to take the difference and divide it by the original starting place, and that'll give us the rise in prices. So the difference is 19.5 minus 18, which is 1.5. We started at 18. So we divide by 18. So prices went up 8.3% between 1945 and 1946. And this is the number that you most frequently see quoted in the paper. That is, prices are up by X amount, up by 3%, up by 7%, up by 8%. You can also use this to calculate, to adjust values from the nominal value, that is today's value, to a real value. And the terminology goes like the following. If you don't make any adjustment whatsoever, it's known as a nominal value. In other words, I just quote it to you in today's prices. If we'd like to compare, the best way to compare is to adjust it so that we do away with the inflation change, and that's known as a real value. And so one of the things that we can use the CPI for is to adjust nominal values, today's values, to some common measure, which is known as a real value, and do away with the inflation. Here's an example of one. Suppose we know that the average Oklahoma teacher salary in 1982 was $16,781. We know that the average teacher salary in 2004 is $35,000 roughly. How much has that really changed? And here, again, we know what the nominal values are, that is 16,781 and 35,061, but how much of that is due to changes in prices and how much of it is a real change? Well, the way we do that is we take the nominal salary in 1982, divide it by the CPIs compared, that is the CPI in 1982 divided by the CPI in 2004, and that's going to give us a 1982 value or it's going to give us 2004 value for that 16,000. So we take the salary of 16,781, divide it by the ratio of those two CPIs, The CPI in 82 was 96.5. The CPI in 2004 was 188.9. In other words, prices have gone from 96.5 to 188.2, or they've almost doubled during that time period. We take the 16,781, divide it by 0.5109, and we see that the salary in 1982 was the equivalent of $32,849. So teachers have gotten a raise in Oklahoma between 82 and 2004. In real terms, not a lot, but they have gotten a little bit of a raise during that time period. Now, this illustrates something that's vitally important for us, and that is when we start comparing, especially when we start comparing across long periods of time, it's important for us to put the two numbers on equal footing and make sure that the two numbers are comparable to one another. That's going to turn out to be especially important as we look at GDP, or we look at the total values for goods and service production throughout the economy. That's also going to be the case when we start comparing the numbers as we move through time for per capita, or the amount of money that people are making per capita. Next goal in our list is unemployment. Now, one of the misunderstandings about unemployment is who exactly is unemployed. Obviously, we want everyone employed. We want all of our resources employed because we want to move out to the edge of the PP frontier. We want to move out there and make the maximum amount of goods and services that are possible for us to make. Anytime we have unemployed resources, not just individuals, but also any other resources such as capital or land or any of the other resources, then we're not on the PP frontier. In the case of wages, in the cases of unemployment of labor, it becomes a major thing because, at least in our society, we define ourselves to a certain extent upon what it is exactly that we do for a living. Especially Americans like to define themselves on the basis of what they do for a living. So it is, to a certain extent, it's kind of a psychological thing with us. And when people are unemployed, then they're not satisfied with their lives, no matter how good their lives might otherwise be. Now, an important question for us is, what does it mean to have full employment? And by the way, the U.S. government mandates full employment. In 1946, the U.S. government passed, or Congress passed, a law which makes full employment one of the goals of the federal government. There was some concern that as people came back from World War II, we'd have a large number of people who had no jobs, that they would be very disconcerted as a result of having gone overseas and fought and come back, and now I have nothing to do, I have no money, and so forth and so on. So Congress passed a law which is Full Employment Act, and it's one of the goals of the federal government, at least, to fully employ everyone. And that's been somewhat pushed backward in terms of our goals in the last few years. We don't feel like we're really responsible for it, but until such time as that law is repealed, we are really responsible for it. And it is one of the major goals of all macroeconomic systems. So what exactly do we mean? We essentially mean that we want to get to what's known as the natural unemployment rate. It's not going to be possible for everybody to be employed all the time. However, we can get to a point where we have the smallest number unemployed that's possible. And that's defined as the lowest unemployment rate that won't cause inflation. In other words, we want to employ everybody who can make a contribution to the production of goods and services. It's important for us to understand that we measure that in a kind of a different way from what most people would consider. Number one, it only counts people who are 16 and older. We're not interested in people under 16, and that's from earlier laws in which we don't employ children anymore. The employed are those who have paying jobs. The unemployed are people who don't currently have a job but are actively seeking employment. Now let's look at the converse of that. The converse of that is that if you don't have a job and you're not looking for a job, then you're not unemployed. And if you'll think about it, that's exactly the way we've defined it for the unemployment insurance. You must be not only not have a job, but you must be actively seeking a job in order to be unemployed. And then there are a number of people who are just simply not in the workforce. They may be retired. They may have decided they don't want to work anymore. They may be incapable of working. We used to have an entire category of people who were institutionalized, people who are in hospitals or extended physical care, those sorts of things. They're not in the labor force, and so they're not even counted in these numbers. So the labor force is equal to the employed plus the unemployed. Notice those that we just mentioned are not even included in that. The unemployment rate is the number unemployed divided by the entire size of the labor force. So in other words, it is the percentage of people who don't have a job and are actively seeking employment. Don't have a job and are actively seeking employment. Now, they may be unemployed for any of a number of different reasons. There are different types of unemployment. I guess if you're unemployed, it doesn't really matter to you what the different types are, but from a policy-making standpoint, it makes a big difference. There's one old group of people who are frictionally unemployed. These are people who are between jobs, typically. As an example, if you resign your position and you're going to work for someone else in a month, then you are frictionally unemployed. Or if you leave your position and you have to move to another location to work, then you're frictionally unemployed. This is a group that's not of great concern because it ultimately erases itself. It ultimately does away with itself. Second group of more concern are the structurally unemployed. These are workers who have a skill set, but there's no currently available jobs for their skill sets. An example of these, during the 70s, there were a lot of iron workers, there were a lot of steel workers who were out of jobs because most of those plants moved offshore. The Japanese and the Chinese began to manufacture an awful lot of steel, and so we had steel workers who had a great job skill set, knew how to make steel, knew how to operate all the machinery and so forth, but they didn't currently have a job. And the reason they didn't currently have a job was because there wasn't any need for their skill set. This one's an important one for us, especially if we consider policies, because this one's one that we will have to approach by finding them a skill set which is useful or currently has available jobs. Next category is cyclically unemployed. These are people who are out of a job due to a downturn in the business cycle. Now, in the next chapter, we'll talk a little more about the business cycle, but when it's easy to see that when the economy turns down, when we move toward a recession, or we move toward a downward movement in production of goods and services, this number is going to get larger. However, as we move back up the cycle, as we move to more and more production of goods and services, this number will get smaller. And finally, the last group are seasonally unemployed. There are some people who only work certain times of the year. Likewise, there are some people who can't work certain times of the year. Construction can't be done in certain months out of the year, or workers in the agricultural industries typically don't work as much during the winter time because it's not the right time of year. All four of these are categories of unemployment. We have various different levels of ability to deal with different ones. Obviously, there's not much we can do about seasonally unemployed, but there are things we can do about the cyclically unemployed and the structurally unemployed, and we'll talk about those as we move through the course. The natural rate of unemployment is the combination of the frictional and the structural. This is the number that we can't, that naturally would occur. And so, as you see here, as an example, if the frictional is 2.5% and the structural is 2.3, we just add the two together and we'd get 4.8, and this is the natural unemployment rate. I have a little problem with this terminology of natural because I think if you're out of a job, you don't consider any of that to be very natural. This is kind of a necessary outgrowth. Jobs are destructed by technology. As technology advances, there are certain skill sets that are done away with, but there are also certain skill sets that come into existence. So we have, as we pursue economic growth, we have a natural destruction of jobs, but we have a natural regeneration or new or building up of jobs as well. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about today is one of the biggest changes that's happened in the labor force in our society, in the U.S. society, in quite some while, and that is the female labor force participation rate. I don't think it'll come as a shock to anyone that the labor force participation rate for women is much higher than it was even as late as the 1940s or the early 50s. This has led to a dramatic change in the workforce, and you see here the numbers. In 48 it was roughly 33%, and 48 was an unusual year because we still had a lot of women working in the factories and so forth left over from the war. But by 2004 it's more like 59%. The result of that has been a dramatic change in the workforce, or a dramatic change in the workplace as well. And some of those people have enjoyed, and some of them they've had to adapt to. Well, that's all for this time. Those are the three main goals that all macroeconomic systems have to approach. We're going to come back to those over and over as we go through, because as we move further and further through the course, we're going to talk about policy making that we might undertake, certain policies that we might want to undertake, and we'll always hark back to the fact that that's a result of trying to accomplish goal number one, or that's a result of trying to accomplish goal number two, or something of that sort. That's all for this time, and we'll see you next time.